BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Friday, another Cooper Friday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Fridays, I talk to you guys about D.B. Cooper, the man responsible for the only unsolved skyjacking in U.S. aviation history. And in this episode, I will be looking at Forrest Fenn as a D.B. Cooper suspect, responding to a challenge question video from Nuke Hoax, and of course continuing with the Cooper Profile segment, which is all about the psychological profiling of skyjackers. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about D.B. Cooper. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Black Box Ned. And in addition to Cooper Friday, I also talk about other stories here on Black Box Online Radio, mostly unsolved mysteries, such as Jack the Ripper, the Black Dahlia, and on Tuesdays I've been discussing the case of JonBenet Ramsey. But next Tuesday will be the final episode in that series, and then I will be doing a new segment on the Tuesday show that will cover the story of Madeleine McCann. So lots of things to explore here on Black Box Online Radio. And of course, on Mondays I talk about the Zodiac Killer. So I would like to let you know that today's episode is partially sponsored by Michael Cole, a friend of the show and author of the Zodiac Revisited trilogy. If this case fascinates you, be sure to check out the Zodiac Revisited. It's a deep dive into the mystery and available anywhere you get your true crime books, including Amazon.com and Spotify. And if you enjoy the series, please consider helping out Michael by leaving a 5-star review. To talk about D.B. Cooper, though, I told you guys on a recent episode of Cooper Friday that when I started this segment here on YouTube more than a year ago, I said that I wanted to go through all of these suspects that were featured on the D.B. Cooper WordPress. And one suspect that I simply couldn't shake was Najib Halabi, and he is the author of Crosswinds, and he was the former head of the FAA and the head of Pan Am. And I told you guys that I couldn't let that one go because he was the lowest ranked D.B. Cooper suspect. And something about that just got my curiosity going, and I did the standalone episode about him, and I have a D.B. Cooper suspect playlist. But you might notice that just above Najib Halabi is Forrest Fenn. No, he's not the lowest ranked D.B. Cooper suspect. He is the second lowest ranked D.B. Cooper suspect on the Suspects WordPress. And recently I had the opportunity to interview John Limbach, who is the author of the book Where Was Skip? And he made a comment about how he had been curious about the Forrest Fenn treasure hunt in the past. And this just reignited something in my mind, and I thought, you know what? It's finally time for me to do the episode on Forrest Fenn as a D.B. Cooper suspect. Forrest Fenn is perhaps more famous for being involved in a treasure hunt that took for 10 years. He was somebody who ran an art gallery in New Mexico, and he was actually very successful at it. So he took a box, a treasure chest that is, and he filled it with gold and other valuables, and he buried it somewhere in the Rocky Mountains. Then he left clues to the location of this treasure chest, and it took about 10 years for somebody to find it, and the chest was discovered in 2020. And I'm going to be interlacing a lot of these different elements of the stories together because I do believe that they are connected. And I should also point out that this theory is the subject of a book called Could Forrest Fenn Be D.B. Cooper by Stephanie 30acre and Mindy Falsey. So it has built up some traction. And we're going to look at the overall profile for Forrest Fenn in just a second, but I do have to note that I absolutely think that there's a stronger case for Forrest Fenn being D.B. Cooper than Najib Halabi, and I'm also going to be very honest with you guys. There were certain things that got my attention. Let's have a read here. Forrest Fenn was a pilot in the United States Air Force, obtaining the rank of Major. He was awarded the Silver Star for his service in Vietnam, where he flew 328 combat missions in 365 days. He retired from the Air Force and ran the Aerosmith Fenn Gallery with his partner Rex Aerosmith, which became the Fenn Galleries, which he operated with his wife Peggy. In 1988, Fenn was diagnosed with cancer and given a prognosis that it was likely terminal. This inspired him to hide a treasure chest in an outdoor location with the purpose of creating a public search for it. And even though he was diagnosed with cancer in 1988, the treasure hunt truly started around 2010, definitely in the new millennium, at the very least, from the reports that I have found. But about this particular type of D.B. Cooper related set of observations, I mean, he was a pilot in Vietnam, and a lot of people believe that D.B. Cooper was a pilot in Vietnam. They think that he chose to skyjack a plane for a particular reason, because he had familiarity with aviation, because he knew a lot about airplanes, and also somebody who had been a pilot in Vietnam would know how to use parachutes, wouldn't be afraid to jump, and they would think that they had the ability to create this plan, to create this scheme, and get away with it. And then Forrest Fenn went on to write that the chest was hidden in the mountains, somewhere north of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Fenn said that in the stories in the book that he included hints to the chest's location, and that a poem that was added said that you would find gold and more, and it contained 9 clues that would lead to the search for the chest. Forrest Fenn wrote a book and story that prompted a treasure hunt in the Rocky Mountains of New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, and other connected areas. The value of the chest was estimated to be as high as $2 million, depending on the appraisal of the items. On June 6th of 2020, Forrest Fenn posted that a searcher on the blog Thrill of the Chase said that the treasure had been found. In December of 2020, this person was identified as Jack Stoof, a medical student from Michigan, and he revealed that he found Forrest Fenn's treasure chest and decided not to disclose the location, but he also said that he would share some details when he went public. And so there are some very big controversies surrounding the treasure hunt, and some people question its legitimacy. And this guide was presented and featured on national news, even on Inside Edition, Jack Stoof. And he said that he did not want to reveal exactly how he did this or the exact location, because he didn't want a bunch of people going to the area in the Rocky Mountains and destroying the natural terrain. And I do think that that's a legitimate reason, even though we are going to see that there are lots of doubts. But in terms of being D.B. Cooper, already, I think you can see where this is going. Some people are thinking that he was a prankster, a jokester, but also someone who took pranks and jokes very seriously. And, I mean, maybe pranks and jokes aren't even the right words. This would be the type of person that would concoct some type of scheme that had a lot of thought put into it, but there's also a sense of legitimacy. Furthermore, it doesn't take too much imagination to see where this story is going. He skyjacks the plane in 1971. He obtains the $200,000. Perhaps he goes to Mexico and converts it into pesos, or he is just able to use the money for his own purposes, and that became a founding pillar of his financial wealth, and that allowed him to do other opportunities, and ultimately the Aerosmith Fenn Gallery, and then the Fenn Galleries, and that allowed him to create the entirety of the treasure hunt, which was more or less a chest that was filled with gold. Now, you might be wondering, why on earth would he not put some type of D.B. Cooper-related materials in the treasure chest? I think that that's an excellent question. And that is one of the biggest reasons why I have a certain amount of doubt in relation to the story. Now, of course, maybe he didn't want to get caught. Let's say, for example, if he buried the chest in 2009 or something like that, or even years earlier, then if somebody were to find it as soon as he announced the start of the treasure hunt, well, he would go to jail. Like, he could still be prosecuted for the D.B. Cooper skyjacking. But at the same time, you would think somebody who wants this much attention on them might leave behind something, the sunglasses, maybe a couple $20 bills from D.B. Cooper's heist, and then just be like, okay, here's how I did it, here's the supporting evidence. I think that would be a storybook ending. I think that would make for an excellent novel. But in terms of nonfiction, a lot of us have doubts. But I will read to you the poem from Forrest Fenn's book, The Thrill of the Chase, which was supposed to have provided clues to the location of the treasure. As I have gone alone in there, and with my treasures bold, I can keep my secret where, and bit of riches new and old. Begin it where warm waters halt, and take it in the canyon down. Not far, but too far to walk. Put it in the home of Brown. From there it's no place for the meek. The end is ever drawing nigh. There will be no paddle up your creek, just heavy loads and water high. If you've been wise and you found the blaze, look quickly down your quest to cease. But tarry scant with marvel gaze, just take the chest and go in peace. So why is it that I must go and leave my trust for all to seek? The answer I already know. I've done it, tired, and now I'm weak. So hear me and listen good. Your effort will be worth the cold. If you are brave and in the wood, I give you title to the gold. And once again, that is from The Thrill of the Chase. And that poem reportedly had clues that would lead you to the location of the treasure chest. And I mean, it really was only a Rocky Mountains treasure hunt, because when I was reading this for the first time, it says, put it below in the home of Brown. Instantly, I thought of Ohio because of, well, the Cleveland Browns. Paul Brown was the owner, and the reason why the Browns wear orange helmets is because they wear orange and white, the colors of Ohio, specifically Ohio University. And this is something that just stood out in my mind, but this, of course, is how people would look at this. They look at certain clues, like what ways can they connect the dots? They call them their solves, but some of them were very hard to find, because when it says put in below in the home of Brown, now that the treasure has been located, I was reading about this online, and apparently that refers to brown trout. And there was a story in the Forrest Fenn family of a very large brown trout that was hard to catch, and they called him Mr. Brown. But even without the Mr. Brown story, you could still see brown trout, the home of Brown. Very, very particular things that would be hard to identify. But yes, Forrest Fenn's treasure was found, and people really, really disputed the legitimacy of the treasure hunt, and they did an episode of 48 Hours about this. 5 people died while looking for the treasure, and some people even called on Forrest Fenn to end the whole thing. The family members of those who died were just saying that, they didn't want their loved ones or other people's loved ones to lose their life over something like this, which is more or less an elaborate game with a very big prize, and Forrest Fenn did not want to back down from it. And I think that he approached that in somewhat of an insensitive way by saying that, well, people can pass away from any outdoor activity, from things like hiking and skiing and wilderness camping and so on. I mean, how is this any different? I think that was an insensitive way of putting it. And one of his defenders also said, 99.9% of people come back fine. People just need to be careful. They need to be mindful. And I completely see their point. But I do think that that was an insensitive way to respond. At the same time, I have to be on the side of someone's freedom and their rights and recognize that he didn't directly cause the death of anyone. And he also stated that you should be looking for it in places where an elderly man could have hidden it. So those are some other points in terms of his right to have this type of treasure hunt and so on. But yes, he wanted attention. He received a lot of hot water and backlash because he was talking about how somebody found this a year before Forrest Fenn died, and people were thinking, was this guy at the end of his life? And did he just want to put an end to this thing? Was he just pressured by the families who had lost the people? I told you 5 of the searchers passed away. Was he pressured in that way? And in another turn of events, somebody actually thought that there wasn't even a real treasure chest, that this whole poem was a metaphor for his granddaughter, and that he was trying to break into the Forrest Fenn property. And that guy's like, no, literally, I just want to reveal my findings. But that man was arrested. It was on Inside Edition and 48 Hours. And then did Forrest Fenn just realize, okay, now's the time, this thing got out of control, I'm just going to set something up? That was the focus of multiple accusations. They talked about this in the 48 Hours episode, but also in the there was a YouTube video made by a guy named Adventure Explore Discover, and he was challenging this story, and I thought, you know what, there might actually be some legitimacy to this. But then, that particular YouTuber, Adventure Explore Discover, ultimately said that the main reason why he was doubting the story that the treasure was ever real is because he thought that he had solved the case. He thought that he had found the right answers, that he had found the clues that would have led to the treasure, and he's like, no, my solve checks out. Everything I said was right. There's no possible way that this other guy was wrong. So this just turned into something where somebody is not backing down from their proposed solution in terms of contradictory evidence. If I had to make a determination right now, I would think that the treasure was real. I would think this was actually set up. I think this guy Jack Stoof actually found it. And let's just keep that in mind. If we are actually able to solve the D.B. Cooper case, if we are actually able to get information about who D.B. Cooper was, are people going to have the same response? They're going to say, no, I know who D.B. Cooper was because only my suspect could have done this. Only my suspect is the one who checks out. But if anything, I think that Forrest Fenn is a very interesting personality. He seems like somebody who would not be opposed to these types of Cooper-related behaviors. And there is the book about him, Could Forrest Fenn Be D.B. Cooper? And before I buy a true crime book, I often like to pull up the free sample from Kindle. Well, I should say from Amazon, getting sent to your Kindle. And unfortunately, the chapters that they give you for free, although they are expansive, talk mostly about D.B. Cooper and the stories of the writers, as opposed to actually getting into Forrest Fenn as a suspect. You can actually get 8 chapters of this for free. And they don't really lay out all of the bullet points in favor of Forrest Fenn being D.B. Cooper, but instead I would like to have a look at Chapter 4, because this is going to talk about the search for D.B. Cooper. A severe thunderstorm and a lack of ready manpower stalled the massive manhunt for Dan Cooper, along with the 727's flight path, for nearly 36 hours. On Thanksgiving Day, 1971, the events that transpired on Northwest Flight 305 saturated the airwaves. Every television set in America was tuned into the news. The public watched and riveted to their seats as the drama unfolded. Multiple reports detailed the audacious hijacking of Northwest Flight 305 and the mid-air escape of the parachuting perpetrator who had been given his name as Dan Cooper. It was speculated that Cooper had leapt to certain death from the tail of the jetliner somewhere between Seattle, Washington, and Reno, Nevada. Oof, well, that's a very big drop zone. I mean, yes, of course, D.B. Cooper jumped somewhere between Seattle and Reno. You might as well say somewhere in the western part of the United States, much like Forrest Fenn did with his treasure. Well, it's in the Rocky Mountains. I mean, that's a very, very big space. The weather in the search area, which had been below freezing when he jumped, was still very cold, and approximately 1,000 military troops began to comb the wilderness area around the Lewis River, where the foothills of the Cascades ascended rapidly into the thickly forested mountains. The rocky terrain grew more and more treacherous with every mile. Roads and shelters were non-existent. It was in this dangerous general area that authorities had calculated that Cooper would have landed after his jump if he survived. Well, I don't know if that's the best way of putting it. It's really quite possible that Cooper landed on flat grounds. I mean, did Forrest Fenn put this whole thing together so he could get $200,000 and open up an art gallery in New Mexico? I think that people have done crazier things for $200,000. But, a minor criminal in the state of Oregon was named D.B. Cooper, and he was briefly picked up by the Portland police on the unlikely chance that the hijacker had used his real name. And of course, this guy, D.B. Cooper, was not the assailant, and this is the source of the mix-up, and why we call him D.B. Cooper as opposed to Dan Cooper. This guy, D.B. Cooper, with the more unique name, is the one that lost all of his glory, and D.B. Cooper stole that as well, along with the $200,000. But, no, I don't think that the Skyjacker would have used his real name. I don't think Dan Cooper was the guy's real name when he bought the ticket. It's an alias. Because, if anything, Dan Cooper, who bought the ticket going from Portland to Seattle back in 1971, was smart, and he was covering his tracks. And he was doing things in a way where he really did not want to get caught. This wasn't just some type of mental break that he had, and his life is falling apart, so he's like, all right, take me to jail, and so on. No, this guy wanted to escape, and he wanted to escape with the money. But of course, Dan Cooper was not the Skyjacker. Inclement weather delayed the manhunt by a day and a half, and the delay prompted officials to debate the precise location of the landing zone. When you consider the speed of the aircraft when Cooper jumped, even as relatively slow, it was a few minutes that could have delayed, which could have meant dozens of miles in any direction. Well, as far as delaying the search for D.B. Cooper, some people say they even waited 36 hours to search for D.B. Cooper. After following loads of true crime cases and missing persons cases here on Black Box Online Radio, I will tell you, 36 hours is your entire investigation. I mean, I've been talking to you about the show 48 hours. It's called that because that's the time when you find the evidence that will lead to solving a case. So D.B. Cooper had a head start. That's another thing. There was also a lot of rain that could have destroyed evidence, things like footprints and so on. And I mean, even if D.B. Cooper was not able to pull the cord, then he may have just landed in a crater and been covered by slime. That's an unlikely scenario, but we're just talking about some other possibilities that could have happened with not searching immediately, and also these delays due to inclement weather. But I think that D.B. Cooper was able to pull the cord. I think he located the ripcord for the parachute before he even jumped out of the Boeing 727, because that would just be, even if you weren't an experienced skydiver, that would be relatively common sense. All searchers had to go on was their best guess, and oftentimes that isn't enough. The pilots of the Air Force jets, following the commands of the commandeered 727, reported that they saw no one jump from the aircraft, either visibly or on radar. Well, I wouldn't expect that they would see a lot of that because it's at night, cloud cover, inclement weather, it's raining. I mean, I wouldn't expect that they would be seeing a lot of this. And also, they might not have expected Cooper to jump, so they probably wouldn't have had their eyes open and so on. And visibility, though, is the absolute biggest reason why I think that they wouldn't have been able to see Cooper. Calculations and educated estimations initially put Cooper's landing zone within a few miles of Ariel and Lake Merwin, Ariel, Washington, that is, and near the southernmost outreach of Mount St. Helens. And Clark and Cowlitz counties were the focus of the search. FBI agents and the sheriff's deputies from two counties scoured the forest in the mountainous area on foot and by helicopter, and immediately north and south of the Lewis River. Surrounding farmlands were also searched, and door-to-door canvassing of area homes. Nothing was ever found. Well, what does that show? I mean, nothing was ever found. I think, if anything, that should indicate to us that D.B. Cooper survived the jump, and just very simply, there isn't a lot of evidence that was left behind. He got out of there. Perhaps he even got the money out of there. And I would say, after all these years, okay, if D.B. Cooper lost the money, where's the giant bag of money? I mean, maybe the makers of the film, Without a Paddle, knew something that we didn't, but where is the money then if it was never found? Is it just rotting in some crater in the Pacific Northwest? I don't think so. I think that D.B. Cooper actually got away, and perhaps he did get the money. And this will bring us to the next part of the Cooper Friday, because I told you guys that I wanted to respond to a challenge question video that was put out on a program called Nuke Hoax. Nukehoax. Nuke Hoax, like nuclear hoax. Some people thought that I was saying Nuke Hoax when I was talking about this on Zodiac Monday, like new Coca-Colas. No, but this is the channel that's run by Vincent McConnell, New Cokes, and he put out a D.B. Cooper video when he was talking about something about, was D.B. Cooper a North Portland resident? That's more or less the challenge question that we're going to be exploring. And I think that the word resident needs to be very, very carefully analyzed and scrutinized. I mean, I think we can also use the term lodger for the purposes of this discussions. And Vincent McConnell was saying that he heard an interview with Eric Eulis where he said that he thought that D.B. Cooper lived in Seattle and that he was trying to get back to Seattle. But I've interviewed Eric Eulis for Cooper Friday, and I thought that he stated during my interview that he didn't believe that Cooper lived in Seattle. It's that he had a hotel room in Seattle, and that could have been one place where he was initially planning on going. But Eric Eulis, of course, would believe that Cooper landed not on the conventional flight path, but in the farmlands south of Tina Bar, not due south, but south of Tina Bar, and that he went to Tina Bar, buried the money, and then returned for it days later at night. And in this scenario, let's just get back to the challenge question. Was D.B. Cooper a North Portland resident? I don't necessarily think he was a resident, a lodger, perhaps. So if we have those two put together, then, I mean, you can take that for what you will. Lodging is so much more likely. But, I mean, Cooper could have had a solid getaway plan. Why I don't think that Cooper was regularly living in either Portland or Seattle relates to the discussions from the Cooper profile segment, the psychological profiling of skyjacking. One observation that was made by Dr. David G. Hubbard, author of the Skyjacker, was that when he was trying to profile skyjackers, a major commonality among almost all skyjackers is they do not mind traveling long distances, vigorous walking, and they don't mind traveling long distances. This is something that's just a common psychological trait among skyjackers, which means that they could have chosen the place for strategic reasons, that somebody mapped out Portland and Seattle and recognized that there was a benefit to choosing these cities because of geographic positioning, because of convenience. There was some type of reason why Cooper wanted Portland and Seattle. I don't think that he's just some guy who's living in Portland and he thinks, oh, you know what, here's an idea for earning $200,000. Here's an idea for a thrill. So he set it up in his own backyard. Sorry, Chael Sonnen, but I don't think that's what happened. And then there's also, could Cooper have been from Seattle? That's why he's flying to Seattle in the first place, and he jumps so close to the Washington-Oregon border because he wants to go back up north. Well, even if he wanted to go back up north, that wouldn't necessarily mean that he was a resident. And I think that there really is just insufficient evidence to say that D.B. Cooper was a resident of either Portland or Seattle. One thing that I'm extremely divided on is, what was Cooper's intention when he landed? Did he want to hide in the wilderness? Was he trying to get back to civilization? Was he trying to get to a payphone? Because we know so little about that. I mean, anything I tell you would be going off of intuition, but I absolutely am not convinced that Cooper was from those two states, Washington or Oregon. Now, Vincent brought up some very good points about how and why D.B. Cooper may have wanted to go to Mexico, actually. Even though he doesn't jump anywhere near the Mexico border, D.B. Cooper didn't even jump near Reno. I mean, that would be almost a substantial portion of the way if he jumped over Reno as opposed to not Seattle, but Washington State. I mean, Reno is closer to Mexico than Washington State, and Vincent brought up the point that it might be easier for him to exchange the money. The money might even be more valuable in Mexico than it would be in a place like Canada. But I do think there is a certain legitimacy to this theory about D.B. Cooper wanting to enter Canada. So he's not going to fly from Seattle to Portland and then Portland to Seattle because that would make it too obvious. He goes down to Portland, crosses the border, gets a bus to Portland. Then he takes the public transport from the bus terminal to the airport. Maybe even the bus drops him right at the airport. He has a briefcase and the mystery bag. And he really doesn't have a lot of gear for camping out for an extended period of time, although we don't know what's in the mystery bag, and as one person even pointed out, he may have had something underneath the dynamite or flares in the briefcase, but we have no knowledge of that. And then he gets the flight from Portland to Seattle, and he really wants to just jump very close to Seattle so he can stay relatively close to the Canadian border. Then he can cross the border into Canada and perhaps head eastward, and then he's just going to be changing the money at currency exchange booths very slowly, 100 here, maybe even less than that, maybe $60 here and there over the course of the next 10 years, using small amounts, because the real reason, as I understand that the serial numbers were logged, is because they were on the lookout for someone who was trying to deposit or exchange a large amount of 20s. And one thing that I think more and more highly of is the possibility of D.B. Cooper having a major disguise in the mystery bag. He wouldn't want to wear the disguise on the plane. No, he just needs the wraparound sunglasses. I can't even tell you all the components of this disguise, but a major disguise could have been contained within the mystery bag. Possibly, and perhaps. Let me know what you think about any of that. But overall, I actually think that there are some reasons why D.B. Cooper would want to enter Canada as opposed to staying in the United States. But I do not believe that he was a resident. Was he a lodger? Perhaps. That's a very, very defendable possibility. Was he trying to get to a hotel room? Very, very possibly. I mean, it's either that or just sleep in the freezing cold in the wilderness. So, I mean, if he's trying to stay in some sort of area there, I think that that would be a very big risk. And then somebody like Cooper could have easily set up some other type of getaway that would allow him to get in touch with somebody. The whole concept of get to the nearest payphone, make a call, somebody who's in the general area will perhaps pick him up in 2, 3, 4, 5 hours or something like that. And the rest is history. Let me know what you think about everything here. But no, I don't think he was a resident of Portland or Seattle. Now, to move on to the Cooper profile segment, this is where I talk to you guys about the psychological profiling of skyjacking. And I'm starting this out by going through the writings of Dr. David G. Hubbard, who wrote 2 books on the subject. One's called The Skyjacker, and the other is called Winning Back the Sky. And these books are really trying to set the ground for the psychological profiling of skyjacking, because at the time, this was a crime that started in the mid-20th century, and there really wasn't a lot of effort on the part of psychologists to study skyjackers. So that's what Dr. David G. Hubbard did, but you can see the MD on the cover of his book, Winning Back the Sky, indicating that, he is a psychiatrist and medical doctor, but he definitely explores the world of psychology as well. In the story for this week, we have the tale of a skyjacker named Rafe, R-A-F-E, Rafe, and he is one of the more bizarre types of skyjackers. He was someone who had a very different way of thinking. Dr. David G. Hubbard even referred to him as abnormal. Rafe is also someone who's a little bit in line with the conventional forms of skyjackers, and he's also a little bit different in his own way. For starters, he's not the oldest in the family. He's the second oldest. He is the second oldest out of 4 children, which is a very, very big pattern that we've seen in these stories from the Skyjacker. But in terms of his behaviors growing up, he states that his father actually took a liking to him. He says he was his father's favorite son, but his father also did not spend a lot of time with him. I'm not sure exactly all of the dynamics, but that's what's reported in the book. Brave was also extremely forward when it came to sharing details. He spoke with confidence. He had a very, very outward personality where he just laid everything out. And he would say a lot of things about his father. He thought that he was his father's favorite child out of the 4. His father didn't spend time with him. His father was also somebody who was not a disciplinarian. He also thought that his father had low self-esteem and low self-worth. And his mother was the one who was the disciplinarian. But their family is different than almost every other skyjacker that I've talked to you about during the Cooper Profile segment, for the following reason. They were rich. They were loaded, to the point where they had servants doing everything. Even though the mother was a disciplinarian, they had live-in servants who mostly took care of the children. And what Rafe would do is that he would sneak into the servants' quarters late at night and sleep in the beds of women. And he would touch them in very, very inappropriate ways, touching their breasts and their vaginas. And it appears that this was somewhat consensual. There definitely isn't any account of the women rejecting him or forcing him to stop. And I also need to point out that there is a very, very big trend of this. Men who are experiencing sexuality at a very young age. In the book, The Skyjacker, a lot of these stories of skyjackers are experiencing some type of sexual abuse, and I do call it that, because they were just children under the age of 10. So with somebody like D.B. Cooper, I'm not completely convinced of it because we can't interview D.B. Cooper. With Cooper, I think there's a 60% chance that he had sexual abuse in his past. A 60% chance that he had been sexually abused. Maybe some other things would change my course of thinking, but we have very little knowledge of Cooper being sexually abused, so I'm just going off of the actions and activities of other skyjackers, and I think that it's highly probable. But this guy, Rafe, grows up in a relatively rich family. His brother, though, his older brother, is superior to him in terms of intelligence by Rafe's own admission. So he starts trying to play games of mental chess with his younger brother, but Rafe ultimately decides that he can win by just being indifferent and not caring what his other brother is trying to do to him, and the older brother is just fuming with rage. Now, Rafe is fully aware that his brother's very intelligent, But the way that he would win is simply by not playing the game. The only way to win is not to play. Rafe also goes on to experience some very bizarre acts of sexuality, even though he is attracted to women, and he would go on to get married at a very young age. Even by the age of 22, he was married. But he enters the Air Force after high school, and in the Air Force he spends time with a lot of men by whom he describes as homosexuals, and he states, again, this is all very direct, that he's spending time with them because he didn't get a strong emotional connection with his father, so he is spending time with homosexual men. And at first it starts out as an illusion, then he states very clearly later on in the book that he is a homosexual himself, and it appears that he was a bisexual, because as soon as he's out of the Air Force, he gets married and he has a daughter, and he actually ends up marrying a woman whom, as he states as well, was abused by her father, and she just became very domineering and very controlling. Can you not see the Freudian stuff? Dr. David G. Hubbard is a very big Freudian, but so was Rafe the patient. He was all about this Freudian stuff, saying that, oh yeah, well, I didn't really get a lot of attention from my father, so he married a woman who was abused by her father, who became very controlling and dominant, even though it's not completely welcome. And in fact, in many ways, Rafe does not think highly of this controlling and dominant behavior. He tries to put an end to it. He goes to counseling. He brings her to counseling. They try group therapy. But ultimately, Rafe would use extramarital affairs as a way of escaping from this. And he is just seeing other women to escape the problems that he has in his own marriage, which stem from his wife's domineering behavior. But then they do something that a lot of us think about doing, that a lot of us want to do, and that is decide to just live off the grid, to run away from civilization. They go into the forest, and some people might want to do this in the grasslands or the desert, and they just live away from society. They bring their daughter out into the wilderness, and they live in a tent. And at first, it seems like it's just going to be a wonderful experience. They're going to be eating clean food and sleeping under the stars and be surrounded by nature. It will be a pure form of life. But then Rafe has to learn that it's actually very uncomfortable to have sexual intercourse in a tent, especially when it's a one-room tent and his daughter is watching. I'm just sharing the stuff from the book, people, and that turned into be a very big complication. So they are dealing with lots of frustrations, and it almost seems like no matter what this guy Rafe is doing, he's encountering some type of mental duress, and then he decides to skyjack a plane and go to Cuba, running away. So many skyjackers are doing this because they're trying to run away. Even last week on the Cooper Profile segment, I was talking to you about one guy who said very clearly he did it because he was angry and he thought of planes as a way to escape. That's what really seems to be going on with these skyjackers. And Rafe actually holds up the plane and demands to go to Cuba with a canister of tear gas, a very small canister of tear gas, but that's his weapon. And he's one of the skyjackers that goes to Cuba. However, to come back to the point about being angry and having a problem, when D.B. Cooper said that he had a grudge on the plane back in 1971, I think that he was telling the truth. I do not think that that was metaphorical. I don't think that it was something light. I think that there was a real stressor that drove him to do this. I do not think that D.B. Cooper did this purely for the thrill of it, and I also don't think that he did this purely for the money. I think it's money combined with emotions. Oh, he wanted the money. He wanted the money. This wasn't just some type of guy who didn't need the money, just doing it to pull off a heist to see if he could get away with it. It was not just about the challenge. I think Cooper did indeed have a financial stressor in his life, but I also think that the real driving factor was probably something in his daily life had fallen apart. Maybe losing a job, maybe getting divorced, maybe being separated from his family, something in that ballpark, because that seems to be very, very prevalent in these skyjacking stories. And I've even told you about other ones from the Skyjacker here on the Cooper Profile segment, that there have also been people who just are not satisfied with their lives. And Rafe falls into this category, but I'm even thinking about a clearer example of somebody who is just pissed off at his son. His son did something bad, accidentally fired a gun in the house and broke something, and the guy goes to his place of employment, and he's just brooding, and then all of a sudden he decides to skyjack a plane and go to Cuba. Frustrations with how life turned out. All of that. It could be losing a job. It could also be that he was just really, really upset with his wife and or possible children. So he decides to skyjack a plane. But a big difference between Cooper and all of these Cuban skyjackers is they wanted to leave the country. And Cooper jumped over the Northwest because Cooper was smart. He thought that he could get away with that in the Pacific Northwest. And before anybody says anything bad about D.B. Cooper, he was right about that. Cooper got away for 55 years, more or less. Or if it's at 54 years, I'm sorry, I don't know any math. But I am ultimately, Rafe is able to get to Cuba, and he's imprisoned in Cuba, but he's actually treated very, very nicely. He says that he has had the best sleep in years, and Rafe also likes vigorous walking. This is a commonality among skyjackers. They have no problem traveling long distances, and they also like vigorous walking. And he's allowed to go on very long walks on the prison grounds. But ultimately, he realizes that even though he has committed this crime, and he might be facing a very long prison sentence, maybe even the death penalty, he needs to go back to the United States to see his daughter. And he actually gets sent back to Canada first. He's put on a boat, and the boat goes not to the United States, but to Canada, and then he's sent down into the United States, where he was ultimately put in jail. But when he's on the boat, he was so seasick that it took him 1 week to recover. And Dr. David G. Hubbard was noting that he had perhaps some of the worst cases of just balance and coordination issues out of all of the skyjackers. Perhaps a psychiatrist will pay attention to certain things like that. But to add on a few additional notes about this type of thought process, we also have the concept of dreams. And I've told you, in the early segments of the book, The Skyjacker, there are so many stories of skyjackers who have dreams of paralysis and falling. They do not have dreams of flying. But as I've been reading the book, I can find an example here or there of a skyjacker who had dreams about flying. And I've also said when I started the Cooper Profile segment, I had no interest in dream interpretations. I thought that it was all just phony baloney, or that it's not certifiable enough where we should include it in scientific discussions. And at first I was thinking, you know what, maybe I can accept that perhaps we have a correlation. Skyjackers don't have dreams about flying. But then it turns out, okay, some skyjackers do have dreams about flying, so it's back to the drawing board. And with Rafe, he has not only dreams about flying, he has lucid dreams about flying, where at first he has dreams of paralysis and falling, but he realized that in his dreams he could control them, and he started flapping his arms like a bird, and he could fly in his dreams. So he did this very regularly. He was a very big lucid dreamer. And then he realized that he didn't need to flap his arms because he was dreaming, so he could fly like a rocket ship, or like an airplane. And ultimately, he is somebody who would go on to commit a skyjacking. But I think that there are some things that are way more valuable than these dream interpretations. How about working with the Air Force, being part of the Air Force, familiarity with airplanes? It's all just like Forrest Fenn. Somebody who was a pilot in the Vietnam War, flew an enormous amount of missions, spent an enormous amount of time on an airplane. That's way more likely than just having dreams about flying or falling. And in case people were wondering, Forrest Fenn was born in 1930. He would have been about 41 years old at the time of the Cooper skyjacking, which is also within a reasonable range. And like I said, even though he was listed as the second worst D.B. Cooper suspect, I could see some of the reasons, although ultimately at the end of the day, Forrest Fenn was probably not D.B. Cooper. But I just have some final notes about the concept of dreaming. A lot of you might be familiar with the concept of how having nightmares can be connected to your olfactory sense, like your sense of smell. There's like some neurological frameworks that appear to be wired together. So they say that you're supposed to keep pleasant scents by your bed at night. And I was actually having a lot of nightmares, and I would wake my fiance up. So I told her about this, and we decided to try it. So I got this lavender dispenser, and I kept it next to the bed, and so far, it has worked rather miraculously. I have extremely vivid dreams now, but they are not nightmares, but they're way more intense than they used to be. And again, I have this lavender dispenser, and I do just like kind of inhale lavender before bed. Once we get into autumn, I'll perhaps switch to pumpkin, apples, and oh, pumpkin apple, that's actually a great scent that you can even buy at Walmart, and it does seem to be working. But I had this dream, though, that was not lucid. I'm not like Rafe where I can control my dreams and fly, but I was on the phone with Alfred Hitchcock, and I'm talking to Alfred Hitchcock, the filmmaker, and I'm just telling him all these things, and the whole time, I'm talking to this guy, and he's saying something like, by the way, I'm not Alfred Hitchcock. My name is so and so, I forget. But it didn't really completely register in with me that Alfred Hitchcock is dead, and he's been dead for like 45 years or something. And I was just like, something's not right about this, but I'm just ignoring everything. And if anything, some other guy told me all about the movie making business. That was pretty cool. I love dreams. I think they're fun. I think that they're exciting. But I'm so divided on this concept of the flying, the falling, and the paralysis because I don't really know if we have enough info to interpret that. And I really thought that Dr. Hubbard was onto something. I thought that he was just going to say, yeah, skyjackers don't dream about flying, and that we were actually going to have a very interesting correlation. Well, with somebody like Rafe, he dreams about flying, he dreams about falling, he dreams about all kinds of things. He dreams about paralysis too, actually. That's in the book. His earliest dream was being attacked by a witch in a nightmare. And I think that it's really just all over the map. And that's why some people just simply think that the interpretation of dreams is not a solid science. But in terms of being connected to spirituality, Rafe is somebody who is heavily involved with his own spiritual practices. His mother was a Methodist. They don't really talk a lot about his father's spiritual tradition, but Rafe takes a liking to meditation. He reads a lot about Hinduism, and he also uses meditation, by his own admission, as a way to escape the world. And that's why Dr. Hubbard thinks that skyjackers are also getting on the plane to be above the earth, to escape the world. And I told you from last week's episode, the guy did it because he thought that he was just very angry, and it was a way to escape the angry feelings. So there does seem to be a type of correlation with that, again, people are very angry, so there is some type of emotional hurt in their lives, and that's why they want to commit the skyjacking. And it's not as simple as just, oh, I want money and I want to do something thrilling. No, it actually seems like there is some type of emotional problem that is driving people to commit these types of crimes. But, there was even some talk in this chapter of the Skyjacker about how Rafe might actually just be a psychotic, all these things about the intense dreaming and like getting his mind out of his body and so on. He might actually be abusing lucid dreaming and meditation because he's dealing with a psychotic disorder. I have no idea, and I think that Rafe's story has ultimately reached an end, because in terms of how we relate this to D.B. Cooper, I think that the way more important parts relate to explanations for how and why Cooper had the grudge. Mostly how Cooper had the grudge. Some type of emotional duress and distress in his life drove him to do that. Do you have any comments about today's episode? If you do, please drop them down below. What do you think about Forrest Fenn as a D.B. Cooper suspect? Do you think that Forrest Fenn deserved to be ranked second lowest in terms of all D.B. Cooper suspects? And if you'd ever want to read the book about him, Could Forrest Fenn Be D.B. Cooper? Once again, it's very alternating. It talks about Cooper in one chapter, then some personal stories in the next chapter, then back to Cooper in the investigation, and then back to the stories of looking for D.B. Cooper and having conversations with family members about D.B. Cooper. So there's a very big blend and alternation between these types of material in the book, Could Forrest Fenn Be D.B. Cooper? And also, what do you think about the challenge question? Was D.B. Cooper a resident of North Portland? That was the ultimate challenge question. Resident, no. Lodger, highly possible, but uncertain. And I don't really think Cooper was from the Pacific Northwest. If you want to challenge me on that, please let me know. And also, Do you think Cooper wanted to go to Mexico or Canada or stay in the United States? I'm leaning toward Canada right now, but I could be very, very easily persuaded. And do you have any comments about the interpretation of dreams? And do you think that they reveal anything about our thought processes? Thank you so much for listening to this episode in this week's Scooper Friday. And please look out for a new series that will be coming soon to Black Box Online Radio on the disappearance of Madeline McCann. And if you want to support all of these efforts, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com. buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. Have a wonderful weekend, and until next time.